Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Dennis. Thank you for joining us today during the Nature, Climate and Land International Law and Public Policy Roundtable for this particular panel on what are the effects of COP outcomes on law and the policies to advance the UNCCD, national and regional strategy, including how to address droughts. It's my great pleasure to introduce the chairs of this panel. I have with me here Dr. Nazia, who is the founder and research director of Resilience and Sustainable Development Program. I also have Abaisa Tijas, the senior manager at the Center for, excuse me, please, is a senior manager for the CSIS LAD, and we also have with us today, Abaisa Nishan, who is also an international lawyer and educationist, and also a lead counsel at the CISDLL, and also a member of the World Future Council. With that, I will now hand over to the chairs to start the session.
Dr. Nazia, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to chair this very important topic. So a little bit of my very brief level background would also be useful to dictate what my main enterprise in Cambridge University. So yes, the program is at Department of Engineering, where we're looking at applying systems engineering approach to political economy. So I have another appointment is in land economy, where I'm a professor, and looking at the way the political economics discipline in and of itself can change the regulatory framework. That brings the two keywords in the question, which is what are the key effects of COP outcomes on law and policies to advance UNCCD national and regional strategies, including to address droughts. Laws and policies are very different things, but in the mind of general people, oftentimes they become the same thing. Law has a regulatory mandates, and it is run through institutions within countries, whereas policies are oftentimes driven by a set of principles of institutions, whether it is public, private, or civil society, or even just a simple marriage, where you have policies that dictates the relationship between parties, because marriage is an institution. So I'll leave it with that critical definition as the chair of this session, so that we can be mindful as we are discussing different elements of what are the effects of COP, especially on droughts. And with that, I open up the session and welcome on board.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nazia. Nishan, if I could please invite you to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Tejas, and a pleasure to follow Nazia. Just some preliminary observations, going from the opening that we've had. We've had on our topic land. I think the narrative change as national sovereignties are seen to be not in a position any longer to address these issues by themselves alone needs to be taken into consideration. And here I draw on the wisdom of Judge Christopher Veeramantri, who 30 years ago in a celebrated separate opinion in the Gabchikovo case set out principles of earth trusteeship, which rekindles the principles of customary international law, which connects the sacred aspect and the link that we have as humans to almost 29% of the face of the planet, because the rest are oceans or waterways. And I think that's one aspect that we need to really look at when we're looking at the narrative at all the COPs, which is spearheaded by a nature's rights movement combined with a rights of nature's movement. Then with regard to international law, the same jurist, Judge Veeramantri, asks us, in the 19th century, we have a situation of whether international law exists, and answering that in the affirmative. Then the 20th century question was with regard to would international law matter? And that we are very clear that it does matter. And now here we are with almost 180 plus armed conflicts affecting across the planet, and most of it affecting the land that we have to live on, which is almost 70% of the land mass, because the rest are in ice still, impacting this sacred duty that we have to protect the land now and for future generations. And how do we then ensure that in the 21st century, which he says is a century of last opportunity to put our house in order and make sure that international law prevail? And here, this is the inspiration that movements such as that is inspired by young people and others from the Pacific, initially moving the Tribunal of the Law of the Sea for an advisory opinion on climate change, which was delivered last May, and possibly later this year, looking at the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, which will get into the not only the convention or the certification, but the application of legal principles to the whole aspects of the earth. And I think it's a moment to capture this imagination. It was wonderful to hear from Alessandra that there's going to be an optimistic realism. And I want to stay with optimistic realism as we dive into what is it that we can do in the medium to longer term, ensuring our duties to Mother Earth. Thank you, Tejas.
Thank you very much, Nishan. And just to round that off and not belabor this, because we have a lot of speakers that we'd love to hear from. I think, as we can see from the fact that this is a much smaller room and a smaller space, and we've got a few participants online, it's not that there's a lot. The interest in land is a lot lesser than it should be. I think the interest in issues of desertification, in issues of drought, is a lot lesser than we would hope for it to be. Although at CCD, so CCD COP16 was my first desertification COP. I had not been to one before, although I followed the documents online. And it was, I saw so much of an effort being made to ensure that people felt like they could participate in the process. And I'm sure we'll hear more about realistic perspectives on this from the youth negotiators as well. But the outcomes of of COP16 clearly have long-term implications, because there is this increased focus on drought resilience. Even though we don't have a framework or a protocol on drought, there is a global drought resilience partnership that comes out of Riyadh that is worth discussing, and I hope we will get a chance to discuss that. There's also a greater deal of emphasis on sustainable land use and restoration that we've taken out of COP16, including the need for sustainable land use systems and the restoration of degraded land, with the Riyadh Action Agenda. And the goal of conserving and restoring 1.5 billion hectares of land globally by 2030. And there's also positive development with increased financial pledges. We know none of this is possible without the financing to actually meet our ambitions. So I hope that what this panel does, or this discussion does generally, is within ourselves, we know that we are interested in these issues, but hopefully with the people joining us online and the people who watch this recording later, it inspires more people to become interested in this area, because it really is a key driver of the sustainable development nexus. You can't really go anywhere without land and the intrinsic connection that human beings have with land. So with that, I think we'll open it up to the panel. Professor Pamela Tuela Sambo is here with us from Zambia. Professor Pamela, if we can turn to you first to offer us some comments on the focus question.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's a good thing to be among like-minded colleagues to discuss this important issue of the Convention on Desertification, its outcomes, and the implications that it has generally for law and policy around land and drought. I like the introductory remarks that all the previous three speakers have made, bringing our attention to the meaning of law and policy, and how we must inform that law and policy, and bearing in mind that international law, there's always a question, is it law or not? And of course, we answer as lawyers mostly in the affirmative. So coming to look at the impact of international law, when we look at the outcome of the Desertification Convention COP16, I won't go into detail on each of what I think are the important outcomes. Tejas has been kind enough to refer to some of them. But when I look, for instance, at the call to focus more on the science and and policy interconnect. I think it is very important. And this is something that we have also learned from the Convention on Climate Change, that the scientific processes that inform these conventions and soft law are very important and need to be reduced into law. I'll look also at the importance of the initiatives. For instance, one of the outcomes already referred to is the focus on drought resilience and the restoration of so many hectareage of land across the globe. That is very key when you look at countries like Zambia, and I'll speak authoritatively from the background of Zambia, because almost all the issues that formulate the outcomes of the certification COP16 are very important, and they have been topical locally in Zambia. But because focus on them has always been at a local level, the importance of the outcomes of COP16 are that we're having this international pressure. And I will put it as international pressure because we're looking at land as a scarce but important natural resource that supports different functions and which are also important towards addressing the issues that we have with climate change, the issues of food security, and all these are interrelated and intrinsically linked when you talk about another global challenge that we have with respect to loss of biological diversity. And I think when we also talk about land, we look at land just as the physical whole of it. I am part of research at the moment that is also now extrapolating and looking more at soil and the benefit that it has in terms of the preservation of biological diversity, not to talk about the importance for maintaining an equilibrium of the biological diversity that we have and food security. Now, back to Zambia. I don't know how I'm doing on my time. I know I had 5 minutes. Back to Zambia, I think we are at a vantage point because since 1995, we have not reviewed our governing legislation in relation to land. So what I see is that we've got low-hanging fruits. This is an opportunity to impact almost all the outcomes that I'm seeing, and these can be seethed through into the legislation. So this has also prompted a number of other legislative frameworks, for instance, that relating to climate change, environmental sustainability, and the building of a green economy. I think I can look into more detail on some of the specific issues if I do get another chance. But all in all, even though COP16 may not be held as having succeeded from the financial perspective of allocating funds towards desertification and prevention of drought, I think the pressure and the initiative to stand together to protect land and the consequential elements of land is very important, and it's a good starting point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pamela. Zunaida, if I might ask you if you'd like to share a few words, joining us from the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa. Sorry about that. But if I could invite you to share a few words to start us off.
Thank you so much, Tejas, for the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion. From my vantage, the outcomes of COP meetings significantly influence national and regional legal frameworks, particularly in advancing the UNCCD's mission to combat desertification and droughts. So with the increasing frequency of droughts, COP decisions must actually translate into effective policies and legal mechanisms that promote resilience, sustainability. The COP on the UNCCD thus plays a crucial role in shaping national and regional policies aimed at addressing, firstly, land degradation, secondly, desertification, and lastly, droughts. My very brief discussion explores the legal and policy impacts of COP outcomes and the advancement of UNCCD strategies, emphasizing the transition from voluntary commitments to legally binding frameworks for sustainable land and water management. So looking at how COP outcomes shape national and regional laws and policy first, looking at national level impact, many countries have adopted land degradation neutrality or LDN targets, and these are in alignment with COP recommendations. For example, South Africa's National Drought Plan incorporates UNCCD principles focusing on proactive rather than reactive drought responses. Taking a look now at regional level impact, COP has encouraged regional cooperation for drought management, such as Africa's Great Green Wall Initiative, integrating policies across multiple nations, as well as the Middle East Water Scarcity Agreements, promoting cross-border legal frameworks for drought mitigation. With the result that key legal changes are now translating to some countries having legally binding land use laws, whilst others still rely on voluntary commitments. And also coming forth, we see a need for stronger enforcement mechanisms for both sustainable land management and policies. Next, in strengthening drought-related legal frameworks, there is a shift from crisis response to risk reduction. Recent COP decisions emphasize drought preparedness rather than waiting for disasters to occur. For example, the Drought Initiative from COP14 provided policy guidance for long-term drought strategy mechanisms. We also see policy and financial mechanisms, with many governments now assessing or accessing funds from the Global Environmental Fund as well as the Green Climate Fund to finance sustainable land restoration projects. However, legal and institutional barriers still prevent some countries from effectively utilizing these funds. I would just like to conclude with challenges in implementing COP decisions. And I've identified 3 key challenges. The first pertaining to legal and institutional barriers, with many developing countries lacking comprehensive drought management laws. Sure enough, policies exist, but enforcement is weak. For example, there are competing interests between agriculture, mining, and conservation then hindering implementation. Secondly, a challenge is also seen in resource constraints. And here, some governments struggle with limited funding and technical expertise in order to implement COP recommendations. And then lastly, we see across the board challenges stemming from political will and conflicting priorities, where economic interests sometimes take precedence over long-term sustainability goals. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing other perspectives on how we can collectively strengthen policy implementation.
Thank you very much, Zunaida, and thank you for starting us off with those reflections. I think we're delighted now to turn to Advocate Cairo Robb in the room, who's, of course, a long-time fellow with the Center for International Sustainable Development Law and was also editor of the International Environmental Law Reports. So, Advocate Cairo, over to you.
Thank you. And I'm so glad that there is this session happening today here. Yeah, it's great to have a focus on land within the context also of climate and biodiversity. And I have to confess that I'm not really, haven't been keeping up terribly well with all the COP outcomes, but I would just like to share my perspective based on my limited knowledge of COP outcomes and really through the lens of my interest in soil more generally. And I do think that there is value in sort of going back a little bit to sort of these points I'm going to make. So first is just that our knowledge about land and soil degradation in international law is not new. We've heard that already. And we can even look back as far back as the Trail Smelter decision in the late 30s, 40s to see the tribunal, the arbitrary tribunal dealing with and providing damages for issues of direct and indirect injury to soil and reduction in the value of the use of land measured by decreases in crop yield. And they also discussed issues of vegetation mortality, reducing the soil's ability to store water, and about soil erosion. And then I'd also like to just take you back to 1972, and this is in a different part of the world, but the Council of Europe's European Soil Charter, which started with point 1, soil is one of humanity's most precious assets. It allows plants, animals and man to live on the Earth's surface. 2, soil is a limited resource which is easily destroyed. Farmers and foresters must apply methods that preserve the quality of the soil. An inventory of soil resources is indispensable for the effective land planning and management and to permit the establishment of a genuine policy of conservation and improvement. The properties of the different types of soil, their capacities and capabilities and distribution must be known. And I think that's partly why there's less people getting so interested in soils in general, because there are some complexities that are and locally specific, but that must not prevent us from getting into it. And it goes on to say, and this is really key in my view, and this is from 1972, I am trying to make the point, further research and interdisciplinary collaboration are required to ensure wise use and conservation of the soil. Soil conservation must be taught at all levels and be kept to an ever-increasing extent in the public eye. And finally, governments and those in authority must purposefully plan and administer soil resources. Soil is an essential but limited resource. Therefore, planning authorities must not only consider immediate needs, but also ensure long-term conservation of the soil while increasing or at least maintaining its productive capacity. And I'm sorry to read that out, but I just feel like you need to just remember this. The point I'm making is that soil land degradation is not a new problem, and that climate change is exacerbating and sort of accelerating the problem. And then the second point is that sort of on a global level, we are now well aware that the importance of a healthy land for helping to balance greenhouse gas fluxes. And I want to steer clear of carbon farming, and I think there's a lot to be wary of in these kind of debates, but just want to point out Articles 4 and 5 of the Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. Both speak to the importance of working to conserve and enhance terrestrial sinks and reservoirs, which includes lands and soils, not explicitly but effectively. And those are commitments that all the countries have made. Third, and at the more local level, we're also becoming more aware of the importance of abundant vegetation, which of course relies on soil generally, for creating habitable climates in cities and elsewhere, and of the environmental justice disparities resulting from the lack of green spaces in many poorer neighbourhoods compared to their more leafy and wealthy counterparts, which has serious implications for the health of all those affected by lack of soil, vegetation, and those who live and work in cities and elsewhere. And then I would say we've also become, as one of our previous speakers mentioned, much more aware of the importance of soil for the world's biodiversity, because advances in science have opened our eyes to the amazing and fundamentally important of life underground. And I would just like again to read a small extract from an article in the Guardian UK newspaper in 2022 by George Monbiot. And he says, beneath our feet is an ecosystem so astonishing that it tests the limits of our imagination. It's as diverse as a rainforest or a coral reef. We depend on it, and he says for 99% of our food, well, definitely over 95%, yet we scarcely know it. Soil. Under 1 square metre of undisturbed ground in the Earth's mid-latitudes, so we're talking not necessarily in all the areas that are really suffering from desertification, but I still think it's important to hear. There might live several 100,000 small animals. Roughly 90% of the species to which they belong have yet to be named. 1 gram of this soil, less than a teaspoonful, contains around a kilometre of fungal filaments. When I first examined a lump of soil with a powerful lens, I could scarcely believe what I was seeing. As soon as I found the focal length, it burst into life. I immediately saw springtails, tiny animals similar to insects, in dozens of shapes and sizes. Round, crabby mites were everywhere. In some soils, there are 500,000 in every square metre. Then I began to see creatures I had never encountered before. What I took to be a tiny white centipede turned out, when I looked it up, to be a different life form altogether, a symphilid. I spotted something that might have stepped out of a Japanese anime, long and slow with 2 fine antennae at the front and 2 at the back, poised and sprung like a virile dragon or a flying horse. It was a bristletail, or a dipluran. As I worked my way through the lump, again and again I found animals whose existence, despite my degree in zoology and a lifetime immersed in natural history, had been unknown to me. After 2 hours of examining a kilogram of soil, I realised I had seen more of the major branches of the animal kingdom than I would on a week safari in the Serengeti. And I would suggest, unless perhaps you looked at the soil. And the point I'd like to make is that the soil itself is a habitat. And it's been suggested that the majority of animals in terrestrial habitats are soil inhabitants for at least one stage of their life cycle. And a recent paper suggests that up to 60% of species are dependent on the soil. But soil organisms play a fundamental role in the ecosystem services provided by the soils that we all rely upon, as has been mentioned again before. Waste disposal, nutrient cycling, water filtration and storage, soil formation, supporting vegetation, building up organic matter, and providing a genetic reservoir, balancing pathogens and providing medicines, and also providing drought resilience. So we know these things, but how do we translate it onto action on the ground? I think when we see soil as this habitat or of air-filled pore spaces, water films, and myriad structural and animal components, it's perhaps easier to see why it matters how we treat it, and easier to connect with initiatives that are seeking to protect and conserve it. But again, what matters is action on the ground. And the COP16 process, including the Indigenous Peoples Forum and the Sacred Lands Declaration, are important for increasing recognition and importance of Indigenous peoples and local communities who have knowledge and experience of sustainably managing land and soil. The UNCCD Secretariat Agreement to the Caucus of Indigenous Peoples and the Caucus of Local Communities can help to amplify the voices of those who have shown and show care for the soil in practical terms, and whose understanding, knowledge and perspectives need to be more fully valued and emulated. At the same time, I'm also heartened to read the action point of the high-level interactive dialogue, which is to create a global science policy alliance on land, to bridge the gaps between intergovernmental science policy bodies and enhance collaboration across the Rio Conventions. So the aim of the alliance is to unify and amplify the collective knowledge of the science policy interface, the IPBES and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And I would also add the, perhaps want to think about the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils as well, and the GSP. It aims to break down institutional barriers and integrate knowledge systems to provide countries with the science needed to create cohesive cross-sectoral strategies and accelerate climate and biodiversity inclusive land restoration of the global land surface. And so it's bridging these gaps between science, policy and practice, resulting in real action at the local level on the ground that is required. And when I say real action on the ground, I'm not just talking about land workers and the pastoralists who have also come to the fore. I am also talking about the investors, the financiers, the educators, the lecturers, the researchers and estates managers in this university here in Cambridge, where soil science is really very low. In fact, it's gotten, yeah.
It used to be there. Yeah.
So we ask ourselves, you know, and universities across the world, they all need to integrate sustainable land and soil management, the conservation and sustainable use of soil biodiversity, and the concept of soil security more broadly into their policies and actions. And so I would like to just highlight a couple of resources, a few resources. The Convention on Biological Diversity's 2020 to 2030 Plan of Action for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity that came out of the previous CBD COP. The Global Soil Partnerships Voluntary Guidelines on Sustainable Soil Management, which incorporate by reference the voluntary guidelines on tenure, which have featured in this UNCCD COP16 outcomes. And also I would mention the Chancery Lane Project Sustainable Soil Management Obligation Model Clauses that can be used as a basis for institutional sustainable soil management policies and in supply chain contracts, so that and that can include drought preparedness and resilience, so they can be taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caro. Thank you for sharing those reflections, especially that piece from The Guardian. I thought was quite powerful.
Sure.
I think
it's good.
I feel like if we can get a link to that, I'd be happy to. I've been searching for it, so if we can get a link to that, I'd be happy to share it with everyone. We're now really grateful to have young negotiators who are at the CCD COP 16 with us. And I'll turn over to my co-chair, Nishan Gunasekara, to introduce some of the young negotiators and to start off that part of the discussion so we can hear from people who are on the ground.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tejas. An absolute pleasure to start off with my good friend Veena Balakrishnan, who is also a co-founder of the Youth Negotiators Academy, which I know has really focused on young people's movements and connecting the climate discourse. But as of, I think the last 18 months has moved the climate discourse into the land discourse. So a real pleasure. Veena, you set us off in this new dialogue, and then two other friends and colleagues will follow. Over to you, Veena.
Thanks, Nishan, and thank you, Tejas, and also thanks to all of the contributions and the dialogue that has come into this discussion ahead of me now kicking off from a young person's perspective. I just wanted to say that talking about stakeholders within the process, there was mention of indigenous communities, local communities, pastoralists. So young people have always been considered as the tools for innovation and the potential, the new skills that they can bring. And we've, particularly me and the rest of my team, we've been keen on the governance and the representation of stakeholders within the process when it comes to the decision making itself, because we're also now talking about the COP process and the outcomes and how can this be translated. What we started looking at is, but who are the ones who are making the decisions? How are we making this decision representative? So this is also what we end up representing. I'm not a negotiator for a country for the UNCCD convention, but I'm one of the founders of the Youth Negotiators Academy. And so what we did is think about how could we bring in that representation of young people, both through building access as well as capacity and capability development and creating an enabling environment for them to then effectively represent their countries and represent their parties at the convention's negotiations. And following me, we've got a few of them who would go also into more of the COP decisions itself, but I'm going to set a bit of context of how this all ties up quite beautifully in the sense of the governance and then also the COP outcomes and then how young people are influencing it. So just want to quickly bring a little bit of history to say that while young people have been considered to be key stakeholders when it came to COP decisions or implementation of the COP decisions, especially in the UNCCD convention, the history of their involvement, at least documented history of their involvement, is much lesser than that of the other two more widely known Rio conventions for climate and biodiversity. So in 2022, when the COP15 was hosted in Cote d'Ivoire, the COP15 decision ended up having 26 mentions of young people and youth out of the 36 decisions that actually came out. This sort of got them to go ahead. The COP15 presidency requested the secretary to say, okay, we need to do something about this. If we are talking about this, we need to institutionalize this. So the idea was for the secretariat to go back and mobilize the key stakeholders for designing a youth engagement strategy, and having and primarily the youth engagement strategy to ensure that it is bringing in that effective representation and adequate participation of young people within the meetings and processes of the convention, UNCCD, that is. So this was in 2022, and post which the Secretariat started working on it along with the Youth Caucus and other groups. And a part of it also then sort of came down to us, because we had in 2022 set up the program to support young people within the climate process. So the Secretariat sort of came to us, and also then with the Youth Caucus, we tried to understand how could we be that one of the implementation initiatives that came out of the youth engagement strategy, or was delivering on the youth engagement strategy itself. So if you see the youth engagement strategy based on the suggestions and discussions from COP15, the decision and beyond, it wanted to primarily tackle 3 immediate priorities. The first one was to ensure that the existing governance structures, young people were able to have the access for decision making within the existing governance structures and to participate effectively. So that was the first one. The second one was about how do we give access to young people again to the meaningful information that they need to participate, and how do we then build their capacity and capabilities. And the third one was to say, okay, how can we then create an enabling environment, so once they're inside the rooms, their decision makers, are the decision makers actually accepting them or not? So that enabling environment is also super key. So these were the 3 priorities of the youth engagement strategy itself, and it ended up being our primary goal as to why and how we designed the program within the Youth Negotiators Academy. So we designed the Land Youth Negotiator Program to support the youth engagement strategy for the UNCCD convention. So the Land Youth Negotiator Program effectively works on these 3 aspects, which is access, capacity development, and creating an enabling environment for young people. So when I say access, what do I mean by that? Current structure, if you see, young people are effectively, they don't have a provision to be a part of a country's negotiation teams or delegations. And also it takes a while for them to get to a point where within the hierarchy of the political structures, for them to get to the point of being a decision maker. So recognizing their status as an interest group as well as a rights-bearing citizen interest group, because they have an interest within the within the decisions that are being made, but also to say that they need to be recognized as citizens who also have capabilities or potential capability to be leaders. So what we do is work with the country's parties and the negotiation teams directly. So usually it is represented by the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, depending on the focal point ministry in different countries. So we work with them directly, and we sign agreements in a way that we can secure access for young people within their negotiation teams, ensuring that they have mandates for being negotiators. So that is the access part of the work that we do. And we also recognize that just getting them access to be decision makers is not enough. You're inside the room, you're sitting at the table, but if you don't know how to exercise your leadership or express your views and bring in the views as a part of your country's delegation and also of the young people outside of this table, then it is also meaningless. So really looking at the second part, which is to say, how do we give them the knowledge and the skills and the networks that they require to be effectively exercising their leadership while they're there? And you will also hear a bit more from the negotiators themselves, because they will also be sharing a bit more on their journey, but also on the thematics and the outcomes from COP that they've been also contributing towards. Yeah, so that was the second part of it. And the third is recognizing that enabling environment is required, which is why we do a lot of advocacy efforts with the countries to understand what are the barriers, why is it hard for us to enable young people within, how can we challenge those, like the current status quo, how can we change the narrative. So these are some exercises that we do with the countries and with the secretariat and with the parties and the policy experts, people within the ecosystem itself. Anyway, having said that, this was also the first time we delivered the Land Youth Negotiator Program. So we had worked with 35 countries. We had trained 100 negotiators. 50 of them were at COP16 as a part of their country's delegations and like as a part of their country's negotiation teams, which was absolutely wonderful to see. The interesting thing or piece over here is this was also recognized widely by the parties. So in the COP16 decision itself, the Land Youth Negotiator Program was mentioned twice in the civil society decisions section. So once it was mentioned in the sense of welcoming the youth engagement strategy and how also welcoming initiatives such as the Land Youth Negotiator Program for enabling young people to effectively participate in the meetings and processes of the convention. And the second one was also requesting countries and parties to effectively support initiatives like the Land Youth Negotiator Program in the means of their in their financial means. So this was key because this is a positive circle in a way that it kind of it strengthens that implementation priorities for the youth engagement strategies, but also in this way we're bringing in representation of young people. In this way we're also able to push for better negotiated outcomes, bring in that innovation and energy that is required. I would stop here to also make space for others to share more. But this is just a little nutshell input on how we have been trying to enable effective participation of young people within the convention and the negotiations for the convention.
Thank you very much, Veena. I think it's an absolutely critical part of where the next generation of negotiators should go, given that one COP process has now completed a full generation. It's the 30th year in which the climate conferences are going on. I'm sure there will be some interesting remarks for you to come back to later on. Now, I would like to then introduce and invite Audrey Nguyen, who's a youth negotiator from Côte d'Ivoire. Audrey, over to you.
Thank you very much. Once again, good morning, good afternoon to each and everyone, depending on the time zone. And thank you for this invite. This is a great opportunity for us to express ourselves. So I want to start first of all by thanking Veena, which is a co-founder of the the Youth Academy. And it has been an amazing journey, right from the start where we've been trained for 6 months. We ended the training in Riyadh, which is the venue of the COP16, and we're able to fully participate. So through that process, we've seen a lot. I personally have seen a lot. And coming back to the topic of today, I can say yes, because the policy implementation from COP decision is a real deal. Why? Because it's kind of an bottom-up and an up-down process. The negotiation actually takes into consideration how we are going to implement those decisions on the ground. So which makes it very difficult when we are in the negotiation room to negotiate fully and to achieve an agreement within parties. And when we come out from the COP decision, countries are actually taking into consideration what has been said, how they could implement that in their various areas, in their various policies based on their priorities, and which is also something that is important to take into consideration, the political aspect and then the geopolitical aspect. We are a country. If I take my country as an example, Côte d'Ivoire, we are a country, but we live in the rims of African countries. So before we do something, we have to take into consideration how it's going to affect our neighbors and how their decision will also affect us, which is something that is very important. And we do take that into consideration when we are doing the negotiation. So taking example of one of the key thematic that I was negotiating on, which is the land tenure, we went into the negotiation room with an agenda, which was to have a land tenure focal person for the countries in order to follow the land tenure issues, which we mostly face in Africa, in my country too. And we wanted that to be a decision, but it was really difficult because other countries have their priorities. They do not see how the land tenure focal point was going to be on like a hub in the implementation of the land tenure decision, and which was really difficult. It took us, 3 days for them to understand that it was a necessity and for them to abide and for us to come out with an agreement. It was tough. I personally didn't know that it was going to be that tough because I saw that as a logical things that should be done, because land tenure is key to achieve the land degradation neutrality target, and it's also key in combating desertification and drought as well. So for me, it was something that was supposed to be an easy task, but it wasn't the case when we reached the negotiation room. It was very difficult for people to understand and then to come to an agreement with us. And one other key aspect that was within the negotiation for the land tenure was a toolbox which came about within the European side, and which was also important for the land tenure focal point, for him to build that tool to help countries actually clearly see what is on the ground, what is happening within the land tenure priorities. So how could they actually see the implementation of the decision that's actually going to achieve the land degradation neutrality targets based on the land tenure? Because if you do not know who is having this land, it will be difficult for you to follow up to see which one is degrading the land and how you can actually put up a solution that could tackle that. So those are the key major issues that I encountered when I was negotiating for the land tenure. And if I could take other examples, which are not per se relating to COP16, but to other COP, I can say that it is also a true fact that what we decide in COP actually have their implementation on ground. When we talk about the land degradation neutrality decision that was held in the New Delhi COP, you see that each and every country, based on that, made up their national plan to address in a more efficient way the land degradation. And another things that I could say is about the drought. You see, talking about drought, it has been a long process that the negotiation has started a long time ago. One of the achievements within drought was the management of the transboundary water bodies as well as the land, because you know that a river or a water body is flowing from various countries. So you cannot do the management on your own as a country. You need to see those countries who are sharing the same water body as you and to take effective measure together for you to be addressing the drought effects. Within COP16, we were not able to reach an agreement, which was something that actually wasn't good, but we're still hoping that for COP17, we were going to reach an agreement. So within COP16, the only decision was to agree on the achievement so far that we've been able to make and to see the way forward, to see how we could actually achieve the legally protocol, the legally binding protocol, the legally binding protocol that each and every country will take effective measure so that as a whole, we can effectively tackle the drought issue that we are all facing in our various countries. So this is something that I wanted to share with you from my perspective and with my own experience at COP16. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for those insights and discussing kind of our relationship with regard to landlocked countries, but also how would we effectively move on the issues of addressing medium to long-term issues such as drought. Next, we have Musi Junior Shakwane, who is a youth negotiator from South Africa. Musi, over to you.
Thank you so much. Am I audible? Thank you so much. And it's a great pleasure to actually get this opportunity to come and talk as a land youth negotiator and to see some of the familiar faces that I was with in Saudi Arabia. So I'll just start off by saying the COP was a very pivotal moment for global action and drought. So as a land youth negotiator, I have been able to be in that environment and witness it firsthand. So just touching on some of the outcomes that were outlined in the COP16. COP16 actually worked and reinforced the need for a stronger legally commitment by encouraging countries to integrate the land segregation neutrality targets into their national legislation, where we have other countries that are just taking them in voluntarily basis, just as advocate Zunaida has already alluded, and we have other countries that actually take them as a commitment to work forth and to work further in terms of dealing with land degradation. So in South Africa, in a South African context, we have what we call the National Environmental Management Act, and the land use and the land degradation neutrality target setting programs, which align very well with this stronger legal commitments that were outlined by the COP16. So we actually work towards strengthening these policies, especially in the face of increasing drought. Secondly, the COP actually was working towards what we call regional cooperation, as already alluded by advocate, particularly in terms of drought preparedness and drought response. We have many African countries. We know that is a fact that we still struggle with fragmentations on policies as far as drought management is concerned. Hence, drought was the major issue in the COP16. So this was encouraging more on working towards finding ways in joint early warning systems, coordinated drought policies, and shared resource management, especially in transboundary areas. Prof. Advocate has alluded the South African involvement in terms of the Great Green Wall initiative. We are also part of the Southern African Development Committee, the Regional Drought Management Strategy, part of the SADC. The COP16 decisions pushed for more integrated and legally binding frameworks as a regional level. Hence, most of the discussion in terms of drought was very heated. You would leave the room very late because we needed that protocol. Africa needed that protocol. We were working towards the protocol and the adoption of the protocol. Even though it was pushed to COP17, I still believe and I still think that one day that protocol will be adopted and we will have it, not just as a framework. Furthermore, we had agreements in terms of innovative financing mechanism, where I had some of my delegation being part of different discussions from your science to finance, also drought, land tenure, we have gender issues. So in terms of the innovative financing mechanisms, such as your drought insurance and your land restoration funds, where we will require policy adjustments at the national level to ensure legal and institutional framework, which will support mobilization and allocation of these funds effectively as soon as we have that protocol. Not forgetting that for the first time ever in the Conference of the parties, we had human rights dimensions of land and drought policies, which gave birth to what we call the Caucus for Indigenous People and Local Communities. This emphasized the need for laws that protect vulnerable communities, including youth and indigenous populations, ensuring access to land, water, and resources necessary for resilience building. Having youth being part of such engagement, even this one, is very, very important, because you reach a point where we are able to bring in new ideas and new ways of dealing with things, because as time goes on, environment affects us in different ways. The environment changes in different ways. So as far as these decisions and these outcomes have an impact on international laws, since we are exposed to different legislations, it also has impact on our day-to-day basis. It also has an impact on the mentality of the youth as it is. So with that, I'll just like to take this opportunity to thank you once more for being part of this discussion. And can we get more youth to be engaged, to get more youth to be part of such discussions, to get more youth to raise their voice in decision making, because this affects us in the next coming 30 years, I'm sorry to say, but it will be us dealing with these challenges. It will be us that will have to come up with necessary solutions and innovations as far as changing how we view our environment. So thank you so much for being part of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manzi. That was a brilliant set of points to consider, and also to highlight how you, within the youth negotiators team, will now proceed to build on your experiences from the last few years and connect with more and more young people, including those from indigenous and local communities. Thank you. Last but not least, I believe we have, is it Shadona? You're joining us from Grenada? Because I also have Anika Redhead. She's not here. Shadona?
Hi, yes, Shadona from Grenada.
Go ahead, Shadona. Over to you.
Okay. All right. So first, I'd just like to say thank you for having me, allowing me to speak. What I would say is that the outcomes from the UNCCD COP, of course, has significant implications on the laws and policies, and more so in Grenada, as a small island developing state in the Caribbean. This is actually important for us because it helps us to align our national policies, our laws, national laws, to ensure that it is in line with the international and multilateral agreements, and to ensure that we are contributing effectively and significantly in the overall achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal 15 in particular. The outcomes from COP, such as the adoption of the strategic framework that was as a result of COP 13 in 2017. This is actually extremely important for us because it aligns us, or we are able to use that strategic framework to develop programs and plans and processes with the goals of the convention in mind. So that is actually extremely important for us because we're able to use it as a guide when we are implementing our local policies. It also helps with our national action plans as well, and also with meeting our LDN. We're able to set LDN targets that can actually contribute or actually help with land restoration and actually significantly contribute with the meeting the aims or the targets or the goals set by the convention. The outcomes from the COP also helps with capacity building as well. It emphasizes, the convention emphasizes a lot capacity building, and of course, it also helps, or it provides support when it comes to training and at different levels. So whether it's at government level, or you're talking about CSOs, all of at the various levels in society, it provides capacity building support for that. And then when it comes to monitoring and reporting as well, and the Paris platform, that is significant for us. And we also have a newly instated intergovernmental organization that is called PISLM, Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management. And that organization, it actually brings together Caribbean SIDS, and it helps us to align our targets or to form our targets or our initiatives in line with the convention. And they have been doing significant work when it comes to land restoration and all of that in the Caribbean and Caribbean SIDS. And considering that with Caribbean SIDS, we are significantly impacted because it's really small islands. We're significantly impacted by drought, by effects of climate change. And when it comes to actually feeling the impacts of it, and then we also developing countries, we do not have all of the resources that are needed when it comes to actually having, when it comes to having adaptation and mitigation measures is actually quite costly for us. And sometimes we don't have the capacity as well to get it done. So the convention actually helps us when it comes to reporting where we are at, so that when we are making, when we are implementing measures, we are able to align it properly and we're able to implement the right types of measures that are unique for our particular situation. And again, last thing, I know I have like 30 seconds, it also helps with collaboration and partnerships. And again, through PISLM, we're able to have the right type of collaboration, collaborate with other countries that are facing similar issues that we have. We're able to collaborate with them, and countries that have lessons that they have learned in their implementation processes, we can learn from them as well. And we can use their lessons learned to improve on it when it comes to implementing our measures for our unique situations as well. Yeah, so I will stop there. I think I'm out of time. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much, Shadona, for sharing those experiences as well and insights from the Caribbean states and the impact it has on small island developing states as well, which has also incredible energy, especially from young people that is engaging this. And there's a lot of questions that I have for you, but that's a separate discussion altogether. I'm going to hand over to Tejas, as I know we are nearing the closing time, but looking forward to the dialogue ahead. Over to you, Tejas. Thank you again.
Thanks very much, Nishan. I think we'd really like to start off with our co-chair, Professor Nazia Habib from the Center for Resilience and Sustainable Development at the Department of Land Economy here at the University of Cambridge, because she pioneers the action research method over here. And Veena Balakrishnan at the Youth Negotiators Academy and all the young negotiators are doing action work, but Veena's thesis, and she's too modest to say this, focused on the impact of the Youth Negotiators Academy. So it's very much oriented with that method. And I wonder if you can speak to that, especially here in this context.
Sure. Thank you, Tejas. Yes, I was young one day as well, and I'm still very young. And I do absolutely love what you guys are doing as youth negotiators to create a space for land negotiation. One of my very early books that I published almost 9 years ago now, was on actually drought, desertification, and the politics around it. It was an edited book, feel free to look it up, and I don't think any of it has changed. And even as an academic in Cambridge University, as one of our colleagues has sadly made us recall that, yes, soil science is one of the area of investigation that is actually not getting enough funding, not getting enough resources, and therefore it is not progressing in the same way that the world needs to protect soil. And this is where I, as an academic, is still an activist at heart, very much an activist as an academic, and I'm very much inclined of championing action research as a principle for all of the academics who are not doing fundamental research, which is about what is gravity, what is the solar system, how does things move from one end to the other. Not asking that question, asking question that touches human lives on a daily basis has to take on the participatory research aspect, not just as a mixed method approach. So those of us gone through the university circuit, have taken a methodology class, we pride ourselves as a mixed methods executors. But at the heart of that mixed methodology, what we miss out is that where is youth, where is women, where are all the diversity conversation? Because mixed method doesn't necessarily mean you're diversifying your collection pool of data, which creates together the evidence set. So what I'm pioneering in Cambridge University is called Art and Science of Co-Creation, which is in my mind, is a very different beast altogether when it comes to collecting data from the ground and creating evidence together with those who actually are on a daily basis making decisions and making their choices as to what is productive, what is efficient, what is costly, and what is not a useful use of your time. Land is one such project that I have spent over a decade of my life understanding. The big definition that I said from the beginning, law and policy are actually two different things. Especially it comes handy to have that definition in hand when you're negotiating on the ground, because law has to be predicated and has to have a precedent that is written in institutions and understood by the parliament. Therefore, who has a land right is very different than who has the right to use the land. That could be just a policy. And you see that many of these countries in Africa and small island countries, the legal law definition for land rights have not changed the time when the colonials were there. Yeah. And it is an unfortunate reality. The second thing, when all this industrialization policy started to become a trend in the 80s and 90s, the structural adjustment programs that has been put in force in Africa mainly during the 90s financial crisis, subsequently in Asia as well, have given priority for the best user of the law. So therefore, then the policies came in, which does not necessarily mean that you will have the legal right to take ownership of the law, of the land, which is the land rights job, but the policy there will tell you that you can actually use the land for productive purposes. That's where you see the problem of urbanization encroaching on the land where food and other important species should be living on, whether it's biodiversity protection or something. So the point I'm trying to make for those of you who are young, that do not underestimate the value of understanding the definition that creates those silos. Because once you understand the silo, then you are able to break the silo. And if you cannot then outstand the negotiation coming from the top tier, something that I spoke at the beginning of the morning is that expert capture. Even at Cambridge University, where we are all experts of many different things, I say that we are expert of very little of the things that matters on a daily basis. And that's where young people, it's unfortunate, often when we grow up, we forget that we were young again. And somehow the society needs to create a separate category for youth voices. My question is why? So this goes back to the academic activism that I think I am crazy enough to do in Cambridge, is that youth should not be categorized as a separate entity who has the voice or the thought or the input into evidence process. And the art of science and co-creation methodology basically asks the question, who has the problem? Whether it's a 2-year-old to a 20 years old to a 200 years old human being, if they have a problem with the question that we are discussing, they all should be part of the evidence base, and they all should be answering the question, how to solve the problem. So with that, I will leave that to Teja, because I think what you guys are doing is fantastic, and you need to really, really go out there and champion co-creation wherever you can, and let not yourself think that because we are youth, we are out of the project, or don't let anyone else tell you that you cannot do that, because without breaking the silos, you won't be able to foster the reality that we're running out of good soil.
Thank you, Professor Habib, and I think that's such a impactful chair statement, because both Neshan and Professor Nazia, we've invited, like, were willing to share space with so many youth negotiators and me as a co-chair, as an early career researcher, which is not something that you typically see across this space that we exist in, but not even across the topics of climate change or biodiversity. And there is this space available in the land debate that I'm really grateful to see so many young negotiators take up. I know we also have Patricia from Kenya here with us, and I'd love to turn to her for some remarks. I know Professor Nazia Habib has to slip away, but thank you so much for joining us to chair this session alongside Nisha and myself. No, please.
Thank you so much, everyone. I have a childcare duty, so I have to pick up the
Okay,
little
right,
one.
well, quickly,
But-
I totally agree with you what you say. A, the colonial impact on environmental management. Secondly, the silo thinking point you made. Also, the lack of evidence brought together and involvement of young people. Now, it can be Cambridge, I was at Cambridge and also Manchester, can be there, but it's got to start soon with younger. But that was very good.
Thank you. We as academics, we need to break our own silos. That's where I am heading.
Well, that's
it's a force area where, as I said, everybody has their own view of things, but I just feel passionately member of a developing country.
Well, I'm a mixture really, partly academic, partly practitioner. So I work on projects, and they should come together a lot more closely.
Yes,
thank you so much. Thank you. I think we'll just turn to. We still have Patricia online with us, who's another youth negotiator from Kenya, and then I'd love to invite, if you'd like to share any reflections. We have about 2 minutes left in this panel, so I'd love to. So Patricia,
as well.
Sorry, we have Patricia from Kenya online first, if I'll turn to her. So Patricia, if you'd like to come in from online.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'd like to share two reflections. Having participated in the two UNCCD COPs, the first one in COP15 in Abidjan, where we did not have the youth land negotiators, and the second one in Riyadh. And two things that come from this is on the recognition, or rather the declaration to have indigenous and local communities caucuses. For me as a woman and as a farmer who works basically on the grassroots, this is a big win for us, especially for women and also for local communities. And what this reflects is, since UNCCD, the processes recognizes indigenous people as key stakeholders in land restoration and also as key enablers in these processes, it is a win because at the national level, it will refine how policies are made. It will ensure the voice of indigenous people is heard and also included in policy. The second win that I would like to reflect is on land tenure rights. I come from a country where we are still battling with women land ownership because of cultural and because of, historically women are not allowed to own land. But during this year's UNCCD conference, we had the members agreed to have a land tenure focal point at country level. So for us in Kenya, this is a big win because having a land tenure focal point, they will ensure that everything policy at the national level is streamlined and aligned with what UNCCD focuses on, whereby gender gap is well articulated and women are able to access, or rather to lead in land tenure. So for me, the processes have been good because it is refining at local level, we as indigenous people, we as local communities, what we need to influence our policies so as to ensure we reduce land degradation and also we contribute to, mitigating some of these effects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and thank you for joining us. I also know that we have Anika from Grenada here with us. Anika, are you still online with us? I just want to ensure that if you've made the time to join us, we don't miss you.
Yes, I'm still here. Am I being heard? Sorry.
Yeah. We'd love to hear your reflections and thoughts on the CCD outcomes.
Thank you so much. Although Shaydana already said everything in relation to Grenada and she represented us well, I also want to say thank you to the Youth Negotiators Academy for that training that they gave to us leading up to COP16, because we were able to learn a lot and we were able to sit in the negotiation rooms where we were able to articulate and we were able to understand what was going on and respectfully give our contributions as well. in the negotiation rooms. I know Audrey from Cote d'Ivoire and I were following the same track, that was drought, and I felt comfortable in the negotiation room seeing another youth negotiator there representing her country, and I know she felt the same as well, seeing me there. In terms of what the outcome from COP, the UNCCD COP has on Grenada, I want to say that just last week, the ending of January, a bill was passed in Parliament. The Water Resources Management and Regulation Bill was passed in Parliament, and that bill being passed is as a result of the UNCCD COP. And that bill seeks to provide sustainable water management, conservation, controlled allocation development, use and regulation of water resources within the state of Grenada. And we know how important water is when it comes to drought and when it comes to land degradation. And I just want to point out that last year in 2024, our country faced a major drought at the beginning of the year. Then we got hit with Hurricane Beryl. And then in the latter part of the year, we had a major flood. And we were also represented very well at the 3 COPs. And it just goes to show that as a small island developing state, we may think that these things may not affect us, but they really do. And I was happy to see that we had our first SIDS pavilion launched at UNCCD COP. We had PISLM there, that is, as Shidana said, an organization that is bringing together all the Caribbean islands and creating frameworks that address land degradation and ensuring that all the Caribbean islands and Latin America and the Caribbean GULAC, we are all on the same page because we are all in the same region and we are all affected by the same things. We are all affected by the same things. I think my time is up now. So thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much, Anika, and thank you for staying with us through this time. We're sorry we couldn't turn to you earlier. We just weren't, and we're grateful to you for taking the time to join us. I know that we're short of time, but I can see that the other sessions are also still going. So I'm going to take advantage of that to ask if there are any views in the room on anything that was discussed or anything that you'd like to share from your vantage points, because I know that you come from different places within this university that could...
Well, my background really is partly academic at Manchester and Cambridge, but partly also practitioner because I work on projects. So I try to bring together practice and actually what happens in the field. So I worked quite a lot in, well, a lot of countries in Africa and India and China quite a lot, and Brazil. So my background is, well, first my degree is in economics and law, so I try and bring the two together, which is sometimes difficult, and sometimes I think it has a scope to do this as part of environmental law. One thing I'd like to make clear is that this is a very useful conference, but one thing I think it misses, and probably rightly so, is the interaction between marine environment and the land environment. I've worked a lot in the maritime areas, particularly in the Indian Ocean, Western Indian Ocean. And it's clear that sort of climate change impacts in the sea, impacts on acidity, temperature and the rest, and cyclones obviously have an impact on land as well. So you can't separate the two. I mean, 70% of the Earth's surface is sea. And I think that's very important. And if you take a country where I've worked in Mauritius and Seychelles, they have a big problem of cyclones. These things need to be brought together much more. I think the economics, the technology, and the science.
Thank you.
Just one more thing, I think. How effective is international law? It's a question I raise often. I'd like to hear your views. I have my own views, and hi. Oh, we're being told to get out there. Yeah, the other things, of course, is in the maritime environment, which I come to again, is Where does law apply? Where does it apply to rare earths that are mined in the sea?
Yeah.
Where does it apply to oil and gas? I mean, interesting enough, rare earths, I don't know whether you guys know about them, they go into a lot of environmental things like wind turbines and other environmental issues, so they're important also for sustainability. Finally, my dissertation at Cambridge was looking at the interaction between law, economics and sustainability with case studies in East Africa. I'll stop there. Sorry, I'm taking your time as well.
Hi, I've just introduced myself. I'm Rahila Raymond and I'm at the Energy Interdisciplinary Centre. And the second hat that I wear is the Cambridge Global Challenges with the Global South. Just a comment that I think the university has recently set up a centre for land regeneration, which concentrates on the fens, but you know, there may be something there to tap into moving forward.
Absolutely. We were actually hoping to have Professor Shailaja Fennell here with us, and unfortunately there was a scheduling conflict, but we hope that we can also work with Professor Rachel Garrett, for example, at the Conservation Initiative, because they also work on the Global Landscape Program, and I think it would be lovely to have all those voices together. So thank you very much, Rahila.
You're interested in the fens, I mean...
No, that's just what the centre, one of the new centres.
Right, okay.
I think we'll probably close this conversation off here because we will have to head outside.
I'll anyway in a minute, but
thank you.
I have a question. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. One question.
Thank you. I think we'll probably just take this conversation outside, just to also let people go. But yeah, thank you very much to all of those who joined us online and in person in the room. We really appreciate your interest, and thank you to Neshan and of course Professor Nazia Habib for helping us co-chair this session. Special thanks to Dennis and Muskan, who have been online since the start, supporting this webinar and especially ensuring that it all goes smoothly. So thank you very much, everyone.